Senator Moran.
Thank you. Minister, Women's Aid Dundalk Refuge, and along with many other service providers like it, have taken a substantial cut to their funding over the last 2 to 3 years. They've been asked to do more with less, essentially, as has everyone else. Women's Aid Dundalk provides a refuge for men, women and children who are fleeing domestic violence situations. The funding issue that I wish to highlight this evening relates to the monies allocated by Louth County Council to Women's Aid Dundalk Refuge for their operational and running costs. This money is literally to keep the doors open and the lights on. It has nothing it does not relate to salary or to care needs. Unfortunately, Women's Aid Dundalk is in a very precarious financial position and they have been unable as of yet to agree to an adequate service level agreement with Louth County Council. There have been numerous communications between the two, but unfortunately on the 9th of July just gone by, Women's Aid Dundalk were informed that at best they would be faced with a 53% reduction in their budget. This figure of 53% is not even guaranteed, as it relies on 3 other service providers not using all of their allocation, which is incredibly unlikely. The 53% figure is the very best case scenario. Women's Aid Dundalk will not be able to continue to execute this incredibly vital service without the proper appropriations. The Board of Women's Aid Dundalk have identified that they would be able to manage a 33% reduction of operating costs, but could not accommodate any further cuts without closing their doors. They've informed me that there would be no way to accommodate this 33% reduction at all. They were informed. We have continually asked everyone in the sector to do more with less, but this is absurd. We cannot ask Women's Aid to work within this extreme cut to their budget within just a short year. The Council of Europe have already reported that the Louth, Cavan and Monaghan regions already operate at 38% below the recommended level of refuge provision. We are behind Bosnia-Herzegovina in this respect. The Dundalk branch of Women's Aid have already been forced to turn away 160 people in need of crisis accommodation since the start of this year. I would be worried that the closure of Women's Aid Dundalk would result in further pressing demands on the other local service providers and more people staying in domestic abuse situations because they've nowhere to go. In times of employment and economic uncertainty, we see the levels of physical, mental, sexual and emotional abuse rise, which is why it is ironic that the funding for services such as Women's Aid Dundalk's Refuge, who provide an outlet for these victims, is being reduced. On the 1st of August 2013, the current service level agreement with Louth County Council will discontinue and Women's Aid Dundalk will cease to be able to provide refuge services. We have 11 days to resolve this issue. Will we be proactive or will we let this service become another victim of the recession? I'm also very concerned for those currently using this service and what will happen to them on the 1st of August. Will the other overstretched services be able to absorb the numbers currently availing of Women's Aid Dundalk? I would ask that this service not be forced to close down for even a single day, that the level of funding be revised to reflect the 33% budget cut that has been indicated as being manageable. This service is not asking to have their funding levels restored to previous years. They're simply asking that they be given enough funding to continue to operate their services to the best of their ability. The reduction of 33%, while not ideal, would see Women's Aid Dundalk Refuge keep their doors open. I don't believe that the 3 other service providers would be able to absorb the numbers if Women's Aid Refuge in Dundalk were to close. The Women's Aid is thriving in every other area of the work. Before this issue with Section 10, Women's Aid Dundalk were looking to expand to a larger building and to increase their accommodation levels. This, of course, has now had to be shelved. The proposed cut to operational funding would be the only reason that this refuge presider would close. Until we move towards a policy and legislation change, we will continue to need the current level and then some of refuge service. Unfortunately, there will always be a section of society that needs refuge services. On our part, in the future, we need to determine a way in which to separately categorise domestic violence, homelessness arising from other issues. As I was told by a representative from Women's Aid in Dundalk this morning, moving from refuge should be a process, not an event. I think, Minister, that I have comprehensively outlined the need for Women's Aid's Dundalk Refuge to have a presence in my community, because without it, where will the men, women and children go?
Thank you, Lasker Healy, and I want to thank Senator Moran for raising this issue and for the comprehensive treatment that she has given to this important matter. Domestic, sexual and gender-based violence are serious health, social and human rights issues that affect people across society from all walks of life, from all cultural, social and ethnic backgrounds and across all age groups. The majority of victims are women, but a significant number of men are affected, and abuse also occurs in same-sex relationships. With a view to tackling these serious issues, the Department of Justice and Equality established CUSC as an executive office of that department. CUSC's key task is to ensure the delivery of a well-coordinated, whole-of-government response to domestic, sexual and gender-based violence against women, men and older people in the community. In March 2010, the Government launched a National Strategy on Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence 2010-2014, a 4-year strategy to provide a framework for sustainable intervention to prevent and effectively respond to domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Responsibility for the implementation of this strategy lies with CUSC. The HSE published its own complementary HSE policy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, and this policy is in line with the national strategy. The HSE policy focuses on 8 key high-level goals and actions, including standardisation of service provision across the country, training for all HSE staff and voluntary community sector providers, and a strong focus on hearing the voice of service users in all aspects of service planning, design, development, delivery and evaluation. The HSE allocated just over €18.2 million in 2013 towards domestic violence services, which is a 2.5% reduction compared to 2012 due to the overall HSE budget deficit. As with all domestic violence services, this 2.5% cut was also applied to Women's Aid Dundalk, and the allocation to which is €425,000 in 2013. This allocation goes towards funding of support staff working in refuges for the victims of domestic violence, as well as those involved in associated support services. Non-pay current funding is allocated through the local authorities. The Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government recoups current funding to local housing authorities under Section 10 of the Housing Act 1988 for accommodation and related services for homeless persons, which can include victims of domestic violence. A significant portion of the funding provided annually is in respect of domestic violence refuges. Some €2.5 million was provided in 2012 under Section 10 towards the cost of domestic violence-related facilities and initiatives nationwide. In addition to refuges, victims of domestic violence may also use other mainstream homeless accommodation solutions that are funded by the Department, for example hostels, B&Bs and transitional accommodation. The National Implementation Plan for the Homeless Strategy provided for the development of a more devolved allocation-based system for the provision of accommodation-related current funding to housing authorities, with emphasis on increased decision-making at local level. Under these arrangements, responsibility for decision-making in relation to the funding of particular services within available allocations rests with the Statutory Homeless Management Group. In this instance, the North East Regional Homeless Management Group, which is led by Louth County Council. The Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government has no function, nor is it involved in decisions on operational matters.
Senator, have you a question for the Minister?
Yes, thank you. Minister, yeah, I appreciate the statement and I appreciate what's there, but I think there's a more direct question specifically related to the Women's Aid Refuge in Dundalk, which does serve Louth and all the surrounding counties. So I would be grateful if you could relay this back and if you could find out the information more on the cut to the funding and if it is reflected all over the country, which I don't believe that it is, because it's not going to alleviate the problem of providing refuge for people who are victims of any kind of violence. And I think it's very important that we don't lose, as I said in my speech, that we don't use this valuable provision and this valuable service in the country.